Thank you, Skaryna, and thanks to the Ukrainian community for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to be here, and certainly Vera's spirit is with us. So I came to London in the 90s, and for several years lived in the community in Finchley, North London. The community was small in size, but it certainly compensated for its size with the caliber of individuals who lived and worked there. It was certainly the towering figure of Father Alexander Natsan, who as the time goes by just realized how great person he was. It was also Guy Picarda, who was a sort of frightfully bright, intellectual person, you know, certainly a male match to Vera. And obviously Vera herself, you know, just an amazing person. So Vera would become my friend. I know many people today made this claim, so I have to substantiate it. Maybe sort of three evidence I want to introduce, you know. Firstly, I would give her a lift after Sunday services, and you know, she would tell me different stories in the car, which I'll share with you. Secondly, she attended my wedding in 2001 as a guest. And thirdly, my youngest daughter, middle name is Vera. And my daughter was born a year after Vera died, and so the name was after. Yeah, so her name, yeah, my young daughter, Vera. So I could certainly sort of claim Vera to be my friend. So she was certainly a person, yeah, a multi-dimensional person. Certainly a person of a deep Christian faith, as we have today. That's what attracted her to the community in Finchley in the first place. And you could certainly feel it, you know. I still have this sort of image of a elderly lady, you know, making her way through to the church in some inclement weather in London, you know, sort of jumping over paddles, you know, just to make it in time for the services. When she was late due to other commitments, she would say, well, at least for the final prayers, you know, I can make it. So she'll come even, you know, with a few minutes left of the service, she would still come just to hear the final blessings. For her, it was extremely important. So in her later years of her life, she composed some Christian poetry, which is very powerful indeed. So, but obviously, yes, but as we have today, it wasn't just the church that attracted her. She got involved in pretty much everything that the Belarusian community did in Finchley. You know, in the 1960s, you know, she was involved in. There was a boys' school there, and we just dug out some recordings that, you know, we have some audio archive from that time, and Vera was participating in some poetry readings, I think, back in the 60s. You know, when Chernobyl struck, she was essentially, you know, almost Father Natsan's English-speaking mouthpiece. You know, so she was sort of advertising the funds. And Father Natsan created a Chernobyl fund in 1998, when obviously, you know, Soviet and then post-Soviet Belarus was extremely poor, and hospitals were lacking even sort of basic equipment. So Father Natsan started sort of fundraising and Chernobyl help, and Vera was instrumental in that effort. You know, just you know, explaining to the Brits that, you know, you know, Belarus suffered, you know, as well, because obviously the perception was that, you know, but also, yeah, the real state of affairs in Belarus. So Vera was a frightfully intellectual person, as was mentioned here. So before ChatGPT and Google search, and if you needed to know something, you would just approach Vera. And that was an extremely broad range, you know, from Icelandic poems and so Old Norse and Old English into the history of the Greek Catholic Church, into some sort of Yiddish, you know, related things, you know. So Vera knew absolutely everything. So often, you know, Vera and Guy as well, they would sort of ambush some newly arrived people from Belarus just by sort of loading on them Belarusian history and sort of linguistic peculiarities, and you see the sort of, you know, poor people just looking at the Brits, the Anglos, you know, who know a lot more than they do about Belarus, you know. And that was quite impressive. So at that time, Father Natsan invited a few students, you know, to study theology, and Vera was very helpful to improve their English and generally introduce them to British life. So often that introduction was sort of through sort of jokes and you know, like a Jewish guy in Northern Ireland being asked whether he's a Catholic or Protestant, you know. So you know, I still remember the Vera stories, but yeah, that was a good way to introduce them to Britain. Yeah, that sort of a blend of eccentricity. It was sort of very hard for some people to even to realize when she was serious and she wasn't. You know, just one example when some nice guy, or also actually called, you know, Rich Patrick Rich, I believe his name was. So he had so he met a girl in Belarus and was complaining to Vera that, you know, you have to get all these Belarusian visas to go and see his fiance, and Vera said, "Oh, you don't need a visa." And he said, "Oh, there might be an exemption for fiancés." She said, "No, there's a dense wall on the Polish border." And, you know, I watched it several times, you know, I can sort of show you that sort of, you know, secret path, you know, no Belarusian bodyguards would ever sort of find it. I sort of vividly imagine that guy and his fiancé running away from sort of Belarusian bodyguards shooting at them. Yeah, but so initially he sort of, you know, took Vera seriously, but then as she went on, you know, So Vera, as many people with her lifestyle, so Vera had some sort of financial issues from time to time, and the whole range of sponsors, you know. So I remember once we went to a very posh flat of a Swiss banker who was also a poet. I think his name was Wolfgang. That was sort of near Tate Modern. So I think sort of Wolfgang, helped her a lot financially in return for helping with poetry. But that was certainly a very impressive flat overlooking Tate Modern there on the river. And another alleged sponsor was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, Eduard Shevardnadze, who apparently Vera met him on a social occasion, complained that she was in arrears on gas bills. And Shevardnadze said, "How much do you need?" And Vera sort of gave him a figure, and apparently he sort of covered her gas bills. You know, I don't know whether it came from the Soviet Union's budget or Eduard's, you know, own cash, but that is certainly one of her stories. But as with Vera, during our trips in the car, it was quite hard to sort of distinguish, you know, reality from sort of imaginary life as well, especially after some sort of a consumption of alcohol. For example, her sort of descriptions of her former husbands varied, you know. So once apparently she married a Russian guy, but the marriage wasn't consummated, and so she dumped him. But then the Russian guy was replaced by a Japanese who married her because he wanted to live in Britain, he had enough of Japan with all the sort of technological advantages. And so he approaches Vera and said, "You know, marry me for the visa." Her relationship with Guy was also a love-hate relationship. So once she wrote an epigram on Guy, but I think it was an X-rated one, so it's probably too explicit to recite here, but certainly sort of felt some sort of a love-hate relation between those sort of eccentric breeds. Yeah. So certainly fond memories of Vera, as sort of obviously as time goes by, you know, younger people probably, you know, fewer young people now know about Vera. So what's important that to preserve this memory. So what we're thinking is probably creating some sort of a permanent exhibition in the library where, you know, the life of Vera Rich and Gatkaz and other Anglos would be sort of celebrated, who are involved, you know, with the Belarusian community and also, you know, with the Ukrainian community as well, just to make sure we preserve this memory for future generations as well, because Vera is certainly worth it. Thank you.
That was wonderful. I'm now thinking about your suggestion to have a permanent corner in the library in London, and I'm also thinking about permanent corner in Belarus, and maybe the sign of things changing for Belarus will be when we finally have Very Rich Street and the Very Rich Museum, and the children at school study English with her translations. So here's to those times.